welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. And our big focus on the show continues to be on the US elections. The 5th November US presidential election is just days away, and the campaign rhetoric is getting chiller, nastier and more bitter by the day. Donald Trump told his supporters in Georgia, "I'm not a Nazi. In fact, I'm the opposite of a Nazi." This as he responded to comparisons of his Sunday rally at the Madison Square Garden in New York to a 1939 pro-Nazi gathering at the same venue. The Republican presidential nominee sought to turn criticism of his rally into a flashpoint for all Trump supporters by falsely claiming that his Democratic opponent Kamala Harris is calling all those who cast their ballots for him Nazis. Trump stated, "The newest line from Kamala and her campaign is that anyone who isn't voting for her is a Nazi." It's another matter that Harris never actually said that. What she did do was to quote a report by The Atlantic, which stated that Trump, while in the White House, had expressed admiration for the loyalty of Adolf Hitler's Nazi generals. That report was substantiated by John Kelly, Trump's chief of staff from 2017 to 2019. Kelly separately told the New York Times that Trump fit the very definition of a fascist. Harris responded to those reports at a town hall, saying she thinks Trump is a fascist and that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted. Her campaign has also used The Atlantic's report and John Kelly's remarks in advertisements. Trump seemed to be responding to those comments in Georgia when he said his father had urged him never to describe people as Nazis or Hitler. Trump said he used to always say, "Never use the word Nazi, never use that word, never use the word Hitler, don't use that word ever." Referring to Democrats, Trump added, "They use that word, both those words. They say he's Hitler and then they say he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi, I'm the opposite of a Nazi." Trump also responded to Harris calling him a fascist by saying she's a fascist, okay? She is a fascist. Trump's attacks on Harris come amidst the political fallout of his Sunday rally at the iconic Madison Square Garden, which has been slammed not only by Democrats but also by some Republicans for the sheer hate, racism, bigotry and xenophobia that were on display. A comedian opened for the former president and called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage, a comment that drew widespread condemnation and triggered a backlash among a fast-growing Latino community in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. Harris later told reporters the incendiary remarks at the Trump rally were not new for a former president who regularly uses violent rhetoric targeting undocumented immigrants. She said, "It's just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual. Donald Trump spends all his time trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. He fans the fuel of hate and division, and that's why people are exhausted with him." While Harris has not called Trump or his supporters Nazis, her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, said there was a direct parallel between Trump's wild Madison Square Garden rally, as he put it, and the notorious 1939 gathering of Nazi supporters at the landmark arena in New York City. Walz said, "Don't think that he doesn't know for 1 second exactly what they're doing there." Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, complained about that comparison and said, "Can we all just take a chill pill and take a joke from time to time?" Vance went on to say, "They decided to compare us to literal Nazis for celebrating the United States of America. These are the same people who call us racist for wanting to secure the southern border. They are the same people who have no plans, no ideas and no solutions. All they have is hatred of their fellow citizens." Whatever Vance might say, fact is the comments made by comedian Tony Hinchcliffe at the Sunday rally was so vitriolic and appalling, and the backlash so swift and strong, that Trump's campaign was forced to distance itself from those remarks, along with several Republican lawmakers. Former President Barack Obama, too, has strongly criticized the racist and vulgar language that was used at this rally. He said, "So the man holds this big rally in Madison Square Garden, and the warm-up speakers were trotting out and peddling the most racist, sexist, bigoted stereotypes. One guy called Puerto Rico an island of garbage. These are fellow citizens he's talking about here in Philadelphia. They are your neighbors, they are your friends, they are your co-workers, their kids go to school with your kids. These are Americans. We have to reject the kind of politics of division and hatred that we saw represented. America is ready to turn the page, Obama said. Pennsylvania is home to almost 500,000 Puerto Ricans who are eligible voters and who constitute a sizable chunk of the Latino community who both Democrats and Republicans have sought to woo ahead of the 5th November election. But on Monday morning, many locals were left seething at this so-called joke that was made at Donald Trump's rally. Many now say the crass and racist joke could come back to haunt the Republicans in the key swing state that Democrats won by a narrow margin of 1.17%. That's just about 82,000 votes in 2020. A host of Puerto Rican celebrities such as Bad Bunny and Jennifer Lopez came out and endorsed Kamala Harris the very same day. That day, Harris also unveiled a new policy platform for Puerto Rico, promising economic development and improved disaster relief and accusing Trump of having abandoned and insulted the island during Hurricane Maria in 2017. Even among Trump supporters in Pennsylvania's wider Latino community, the joke was very poorly received. On Monday, Kamala Harris warned that the consequences of Donald Trump returning to the presidency would be brutally serious. She said, and this time there will be no one to stop him, not even the Supreme Court, which months ago told the former president that he's essentially immune no matter what he would do in the White House. Significantly, tonight, Kamala Harris will make a speech, which is being described as a closing argument speech in Washington, D.C. The spot that has been chosen by her campaign for this speech is the Ellipse near the White House. It's that patch of a park where Donald Trump rallied his supporters on 6 January 2021. The same supporters later stormed the US Capitol, went on a rampage and vandalized the seat of American democracy in an act of unprecedented violence in US history. Harris hopes to evoke those memories as she continues to issue dire warnings about her rival and what a second Trump presidency could look like. Tuesday's high-profile speech is also one of the last opportunities for the vice president to try and reach a critical segment of the electorate, known inside the campaign as conflicted voters or those who may have concerns with Trump's conduct but who are not yet convinced that Harris is a candidate of change who can get the country on track. The one big takeaway from 6 January that Harris wants to drive home is that her own victory would turn the page on Trump's divisiveness. She also plans to once again outline her plans for the country, especially on the economy, which seems to be the top issue for most voters. The primary objective of this speech, however, would be to highlight the deep contrast between Harris and Trump. Standing on the ellipse, which will allow Harris to bring familiar arguments about democracy to life in a setting that explicitly highlights the lengths that Trump and his allies went to in an effort to overturn the 2020 election. The venue will also underscore how she believes a second Trump term could be far worse.
With a week to go until the November 5th election, U.S. Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris and her Republican rival Donald Trump on Monday worked to win over the few remaining undecided and independent voters in key battleground states. Trump courted religious voters in the southern swing state of Georgia during an event with the National Faith Advisory Board.
I mean, honestly, religion is under threat in this country, serious threat, and we can't let that happen because I really believe it's sort of the fabric of our country. It's the thing that holds our country together.
Later, to a crowd of thousands at a rally in Atlanta, Trump rejected Harris's recent contention that he is a fascist, calling himself, quote, the opposite of a Nazi.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Trump also continued to face backlash Monday over his New York City rally a day earlier, where a comedian called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage and peddled other racist tropes about Latinos, an important demographic in several of the 7 swing states that will decide who wins the presidency. Harris, as well as popular Puerto Rican celebrities and some congressional Republicans, have all since denounced the comments. The Trump campaign has said the joke did not reflect its views, though the candidate himself has not addressed the comments. Meanwhile, Harris on Monday was in Michigan, where she first toured a semiconductor facility and made her pitch to union workers.
Union labor and hard work is so much of what fought for workers' rights across the board. So, look, I'm here for you.
Later that evening, Harris appeared at a rally in Ann Arbor with her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris framed Trump, as she has increasingly in recent weeks, as a threat to American democracy and the Constitution.
And listen, you all have heard me say, I do believe Donald Trump to be an unserious man. But the consequences of him ever being president again are brutally serious. Brutally serious.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday joined the some 46 million Americans who have cast early ballots in the November 5th contest, according to the election lab at the University of Florida. National polls, including the latest one from Reuters Ipsos, as well as surveys in swing states, have Harris and Trump neck and neck, with Election Day just around the corner.
He's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi. I don't know. It's true. My father always used to tell me, don't use the word, ever use the word Nazi. And, it's incredible now the way they talk is so disgusting and just horrible the way they talk.
And listen, you all have heard me say, I do believe Donald Trump to be an unserious man. But the consequences of him ever being president again are brutally serious. Brutally serious. Consider, on the topic we were just discussing, Donald Trump still refuses to acknowledge the pain and suffering he has caused. He insists that, quote, everyone wanted for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. And I'm traveling our nation, so I have to tell everyone here, across our nation, so much is on the line in this election, and this is not 2016 or 2020. We can all see that Donald Trump is even more unstable and more unhinged, and now he wants unchecked power.
We have to reject the kind of politics of division and hatred that we saw represented. America's ready to turn the page. America's ready for a better story. Philadelphia, we are ready for a President Kamala Harris.
Could the election rhetoric in this election cycle get any shriller? Could it get any more bitter? Okay, let's discuss this and a host of other issues with our panelists. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Professor Umu Salma Bawa. She teaches at the Center for European Studies at the School of International Studies at JNU. Ambassador Suresh Goel, former Indian diplomat, is back with us on the show. And completing the panel tonight is Adit Kothari, Foreign Affairs Analyst, who joins us live from London. A warm welcome to all my guests. Professor Bawa, let me start with you. Kamala Harris says he is an unstable, unhinged fascist. A second Trump presidency would have brutally serious consequences. Trump says, I'm not a Nazi, I'm the opposite of a Nazi. She is a fascist, in fact. But let's, for a moment, focus on what happened at the Madison Square Garden on Sunday night, where the kind of language that was used by Trump and his supporters, especially that one comedian, tells us just how bitter, divisive, and hate-filled this election campaign has been in the United States of America. Barack Obama, while addressing a rally in Philadelphia, said, this man holds a big rally in Madison Square Garden, and the warm-up speakers were trotting out and peddling the most racist, sexist, bigoted stereotypes. One guy called Puerto Rico an island of garbage. They're talking about your fellow citizens. They're talking about your co-workers. They are talking about Americans. Fact of the matter is, Pennsylvania is one of the key swing states which is home to almost 500,000 Puerto Ricans who are eligible voters and who constitute a sizable chunk of the Latino community, who both the Democrats and the Republicans have been trying very hard to woo ahead of the November 5th election. The question I want to ask you is, apart from the obvious fact of how hate-filled this election campaign has been, do you believe this kind of rhetoric could come back to haunt Donald Trump and the Republicans in this election?
Good evening, Neha, and thank you for having me on the show. And I address your question directly. You know, it's a week away from election day to the Electoral College in America, and it's a very divisive, terrain has become. And at that point, one can see that as they come into the line, the finishing line, name calling has become kind of the order of the day. But let's look beyond that. Let's look at what happened at Madison Square Garden in that warm up to before Trump spoke. One would not have expected this kind of an attack on fellow citizens. The fact that the campaign and the leader of one of the political parties, in that warm up would attack fellow citizens in such a way and then ask for others to take a chill pill, I don't think is the way you write a script to winning a political strategy or even winning an election. As you correctly pointed out, Pennsylvania is one of the 7 swing states with 19, seats on the Electoral College. And with this substantial number of Puerto Ricans who are living over there, this is coming at a time when one would be looking at a positive outcome of any rally or any speech converting into a vote, not converting into the opposite direction, which is pushing the votes away from the expected candidate to the other side. So clearly one can see that the fallout of this are going to be visible. There's been a strong pushback from the community. Remember, it's not just Pennsylvania. Puerto Ricans are also living in other states. They could also be in other swing states. So this kind of a language to fellow Americans who are voting, clearly shows that there is such a strong, push towards dividing people at this point. And you've seen speaker after speaker on the other side, as you correctly pointed, former President Obama has also said, let's reject all this hatred. Let's vote for America. What does America stand for? So clearly, this is going to become an issue in the coming days. And today, as Kamala Harris will speak in Washington, this is going to be a moment of make or break in the run-up to the voting next Tuesday.
Speech tonight could be a make or break for Kamala Harris. That's what you're saying. Well, it is certainly a much anticipated speech, and the venue that has been chosen is laden with symbolism. So let me take this to Ambassador Suresh Goyal. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, throughout this campaign, Kamala Harris has called Trump unhinged, unstable, dangerous, a fascist, somebody whose re-election to the White House could have quote-unquote brutally serious consequences for the American people and American democracy. And tonight, in her closing argument speech, Kamala Harris is hoping to evoke the horrific memories of 6th January 2021 from the same spot where Trump addressed his supporters, who then went on to storm the US Capitol and vandalized the very seat of American democracy in an effort to overturn the 2020 election. More than anything else, what Kamala Harris will look to drive home through that speech is the stark difference between herself and Donald Trump and what a Trump presidency could represent. How important do you think the speech and the symbolism of the venue is likely to be? And do you believe that the divisiveness that we are witnessing has in fact emerged as the biggest factor in this election, with a lot of important and serious issues perhaps even being brushed aside. Could you unmute yourself, sir?
Thank you. Am I not audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much, Neha. The last question first. I was just thinking to myself, really, that I've finally begun to understand the US elections, because throughout my life, I've never really heard the kind of divisive language, vituperative, name calling in my life in the US elections before. I was there during Obama elections. I was there during, I wasn't there, but I heard the elections about the Trump. I never really saw this kind of language being used before. Name calling, when people are being called fascist, when people are being called racist, etc., and all kinds of things. And when Puerto Rico is being called the heap of garbage, that kind of a thing. So I think finally I've begun to understand how the election campaigns are run in the USA, but that's in a lighter vein, really. The fact is, if you want to understand whether what happened yesterday in MSG, will it make a difference to the election campaign or not? How is it going to really matter for Kamala Harris? Whether Kamala Harris speaking from the Ellipse Garden is going to make any difference, etc., or not. I do think that while the optics and the language being used and the atmospherics in the last week of election, before the elections, is important. It does swing a few votes, but I don't think that it makes such a huge difference in the marches. I think what happens really is that, first of all, in the swing votes between the Republicans and the Democrats, the difference really is very, very narrow, to be impacted by the last minute speeches, how much ever emotive they are. Number one. Number two, I do think that Obama's election was an exception. I have lived in the USA for more than 4 or 5 years, and I do find that despite the huge acceptance of other races, the USA remains extremely, I hate to use the word, but the USA remains extremely sensitive to who goes in the White House. It has been very rare that you have had a non-Irish person, a non-white person in the White House, and particularly a woman. I hope you remember the elections of Hillary Clinton. He lost at the last moment, even though she was actually higher in the margins till the last day. So Kamala Harris faces a lot of disadvantages. She's a woman. She's of a mixed race. She's a Democrat. And the Republicans have the advantage because they are addressing the kind of weak nerve of the American right. And Trump has come down to it again, really. He's talking about the economic inequality, immigration. He's talking about how it impacts upon the US population, the white supremacist population. And he's talking about making the America great again. He's come back to the same kind of language. And therefore, much as I personally may dislike Trump being in the White House, the fact is that a large number of Americans do look at him as a very serious candidate. And the campaign is running on very thin margins. And therefore, I do not know how the speech from Ellipse Garden is going to make an impact. It's a serious attempt. Kamala Harris had begun to fall behind. I hope she regains, because she's my favorite. But the fact is she American favorite? Are they going to vote for her or for Trump? Let us see.
It's a $1 million question, but I must say, as a diplomat, You were very polite when you used a euphemism like Americans are sensitive about who goes to the White House. I wouldn't hesitate to say that, unfortunately, a very large section of Americans are downright racist. Of course, a lot of Trump supporters and all the MAGA supporters are white supremacists. And of course, I will not hesitate to add that a very large segment of American population, unfortunately, is also sexist, because this is 2024. We're talking about the world's oldest democracy, and guess what? They have till date not had a single woman president. And here we're talking about a woman of color who's taking on.
Thank you.
Man.
Thank you.
I'm glad. I hope thank you means you agree with me.
I completely. I'm mostly guarded in what I say, but you have put it right. Thank you. Okay.
You're a diplomat.
Yes.
I'm a journalist, so I can afford to be more direct and blunt in the words that I use. Let me now take this to Adit Kothari. Adit Kothari. You know, the Trump campaign may have distanced itself from the comment made by the comedian calling Puerto Rico an island of garbage. And J.D. Vance may be telling Americans to take a chill pill. Can't we take a joke from time to time? Fact of the matter is, we all know there's been a massive backlash against what was said at the Madison Square Garden on Sunday night. And as has been pointed out by Ambassador Goel and many others, we know this is going to be a very tight race. The victory margin is likely to be extremely narrow. It could be wafer thin. And just to remind our viewers, many Puerto Ricans have expressed absolute outrage and disgust over the comments that were made. Many of them are saying, we will not forget. And in the state of Pennsylvania, which is a key swing state, remember the Democrats won the 2020 election by a narrow margin of 1.17%. That's about 82,000 votes. Not to mention that many Puerto Rican celebrities such as Bad Bunny and Jennifer Lopez came out and endorsed Kamala Harris the very same day. My question is, Trump and his supporters can go on justifying those comments all they want or be dismissive of them. Could this actually come back to haunt them and make a significant difference in what is clearly going to be a very tight election?
Look, Neha, there's no doubt, you know, the comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, that's his name.
Yes.
I actually sat down and watched that 11 minutes of, you know, his pitch, or, you know, whatever it was. It was everything apart from stand-up comedy at the end of the day. But every single word that man uttered was in absolute poor taste. But it more or less demonstrated the bad and the poor strategy of the Trump, you know, the people behind the Trump campaign. And, you know, why would they even platform this chap? This was, in my opinion, quite a self-goal, especially like you mentioned in a state like Pennsylvania, where Puerto Ricans are known to be politically quite active. I think they comprise roughly between 3.5% to 4% of the electorate. So it will, you know, it will prove costly from that perspective. You know, if I was a Puerto Rican, I don't think I would have been quite happy with that particular, you know, platforming of a comedian of that standard. And B, you know, the kind of responses that we've heard from the Trump campaign thereafter, trying to sort of gaslight it and trying to sort of monkey balance it in a very poor sort of way. So, you know, point being, you know, this was done in a very poor way, and this could have been handled better. But language, I don't think has been better in any of the campaigns here. I mean, we are hearing the kind of language that is being used by the presidential candidate of the Democrats, for instance. That language is in extremely poor taste as well. You know, both taking digs at each other, both calling each other names. You know, this has never been the kind of presidential campaigns that we've seen ever before. I mean, you know, this is where all the class has now gone out of the bag. All your political correctness has now gone. You know, any any diplomacy that you would have in the realm of politics is not being demonstrated in this particular campaign. And you can sense that, the kind of language that, especially that, Harris is basically using, she is slipping away to a great degree. She is not talking about the core issues which affect the people. She is shying away from the TV debates that she's been on or the TV interviews that she's been on. She's trying to deflect all the blame to Trump, which I think is completely mindless. So, it says that, it's a desperate attempt because it's such a neck-to-neck kind of a competition. It's such a neck-to-neck kind of a fight. Trump, on the other hand, while he's making these insidious kind of statements where he's saying, he's talking about immigrants being bloodthirsty, or, he's talking about immigrants essentially coming and
the
stealing
cats.
away.
Remember?
Eat the cats, or yeah, absolutely. But see, you have to realize that it's pointed towards a certain electorate. So he understands his electorate really well, and it is completely directed towards that electorate, and it sort of resonates. This sort of narrative resonates with that sort of electorate. Whereas on the other side, Kamala Harris is going about this all-out attack on Trump, which is actually making no sense because the electorate that she's pitching to already hate Trump already. So they're not convinced with Trump's
preaching to the
rhetoric
choir
or his politics.
Okay, point taken. She's preaching to the choir. Though many in the Harris campaign are hoping that with that speech tonight from the Ellipse Garden, perhaps Kamala Harris can appeal to some of the undecided voters who the Harris campaign refers to as the conflicted voters, those who are uncomfortable with Trump but at the same time not entirely convinced that Harris is the right person for the job. Can Kamala Harris bring those voters onto her side with the speech tonight? That remains a big question. And yes, Adit, you're right, there has been a distinct shift in Kamala Harris's campaign pitch over the last few days. What does that tell us? We will look at that in greater detail on the other side of this quick break.
Hey, why are so many lights on? Is it Navroz?
Settling accounts, uncle?
No, writing a love letter. Check your accounts every day and ensure there is no mismatch. Exchange sends trade-related messages daily. Do timely verification. And if there is a mismatch, inform the exchange immediately.
Soch kar, samajh kar, invest kar.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
It's said that out of 7 diamonds across the world, 5 are cut and polished in India.
Don't forget, US is the largest consumer of, polished diamonds and the diamond jewelry. And that has taken a big beating for multiple reasons, but largely because of the consumer spending going down on these items. And that's essentially what has hit the diamond industry.
We are at a brim where you see not just one, but multiple very strong global brands coming out of India. And we will make a global mark, and I'm convinced about that.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the US presidential election, which is now just days away. Professor Bava, let me come back to you. In the last segment, Adit Kothari said that, Kamala Harris sounds desperate as she goes on attacking Donald Trump. Well, fact of the matter is that, in the home stretch of any election, you do generally see the rhetoric getting shriller and the attacks getting more personal. Trump is constantly resorting to dog whistles, targeting immigrants. Some could call that desperate. He's even said religion holds our country together and religion is under threat in our country. Now, that could sound desperate. However, keeping the focus for a moment on Kamala Harris, do you believe that that a degree of nervousness has set in within the Democratic ranks in recent days? Because, earlier Kamala Harris's message was more about joy, hope, optimism vis-a-vis a better, brighter future for Americans. Now she's increasingly painting a grim scenario of a potential second Trump presidency. She's no longer talking about issues like the economy and abortion, and that is an issue where she has a clear edge over Trump, but she is, referring constantly to him as being unhinged, an unstable fascist, and painting him as a clear threat to democracy. Do you sense that shift in stance, and do you believe that reflects some kind of nervousness?
So I think, with just a few days left to the election, to the Electoral College, it's the big push. And ultimately, in America, one has to understand it's a presidential system, right? It is the president leads. He's not only the head of the state, he's also the head of the government. Till one could say there's a part of the campaign which has gone on till now, let's say the final part, till Madison Square Garden and what is happening today. Let's put at this as where the big issues and the big ticket items were on focus. There's been name calling, as both my fellow panelists have pointed out, and that has gone up and down and has become worse in the last few days. And so obviously you don't expect if a candidate is calling out names, the other candidate, will not call out names. But yes, it does see the sense of, the way you conduct yourself in this election rally definitely drop down, in terms of the quality which has happened. But I think I don't call it as a sign of desperation. Let me put it in another way. The focus is on the individual, on the leader. And I think what one can take away as a message when you look at, both Trump and at Kamala Harris is what will be the style of leadership. Trump has shown that he clearly will endorse a divisive politics. He and his people who are running his campaign are not averse to naming fellow Americans as rubbish and trash. Clearly, that's a very strong message which is going out. He is also anti-immigrant, which is also be a strong fear running through not only the immigrants, but also those businesses, which are also working. But on the other hand, probably what Kamala Harris, one can say, is she's probably trying to reach out to those last few voters, undecided, to connect at a personal level and say, okay, consider who is going to be in the White House. What kind of individual do you want? Macro policies aside, people then it is connect with leaders at an emotional level. And I think that is an important point which needs to be emphasized while understanding that the final pitch which happens is to the emotional connect. One can talk about how the economy will change, what will happen on the economic policy, in the housing policy, but let's all keep in mind that it will affect every individual American citizen in a very, very distinct and unique way. No two people will experience it unless, they're on that same financial level. So this is an emotional appeal to the voter, ultimately. What is the kind of person? And I think, as you asked earlier, the closing remarks as Kamala Harris will give today at the ellipse is also symptomatic and symbolic of the politics of hope. She's saying this is the place of insurrection. I am going to bring to you, as the leader of America, the politics of hope. So I think there's a very clear attempt at a personal messaging which is going.
Personal messaging, a message of hope, while at the same time reminding Americans of the dire consequences of a possible second Trump presidency. Therefore, clearly, the venue that's been chosen is laden with symbolism. Ambassador Goel, I want to ask you two questions. One, by painting Donald Trump repeatedly as a threat to American democracy and using the symbolism of the ellipse for her closing argument speech, do you believe that Kamala Harris can bring on to her side the undecided voters that her campaign refers to as the conflicted voters, or do you actually agree with Adit Kothari, who says she's preaching to the choir? People who care about American democracy, or rather who see Trump as a threat to American democracy, have already made up their minds about voting for Kamala Harris. Will she really be able to win over any new voters? That's one. Two, I wonder what you make of the backlash that the Washington Post has received following Jeff Bezos' decision not to endorse Kamala Harris for presidency. Apparently, a reversal of a decision that they had made at the very last minute.
There are two things. I will answer the two questions, but in a slightly different manner, really. First of all, I think the 1 week remaining is not my personal belief or assessment, if you want to call it that, is going to make much of a difference in terms of the voter attraction to either of the candidates. Whether it is Kamala Harris speaking from the ellipse garden, democratic practices, so on and so forth, or the Washington Post survey about the report that you are referring to. There is just one thing really. I think Kamala Harris realizes that she is fighting two disadvantages. One is the Biden legacy. Now, Biden has not been able to convince either the Arab Muslim votes in the USA or the Jewish votes or the European security votes, either way, in terms of what the democratic policies have been. And Kamala Harris's own pronouncements in the debate, the first debate that she did, she was not particularly forthcoming on the foreign policy issues, if you recall. So Kamala Harris, first of all, fighting the legacy of Joe Biden is one difficult thing. And number two, fighting the pitch from Trump, who talks about whether it is actually vituperative, whatever you want to call it, but the language has never made any difference to the American public. Whether the president can use 4-letter words in private conversation, people don't mind that at all. In that case, to basically fight Trump, who's talking about the America's greatness, who's talking about the white supremacy. And please do remember, a large number of votes come from where? So I think Kamala has a very difficult battle at hand, and the racism and the ethnicism and everything comes into play, gender comes into play. So let us see what happens. I remain optimistic that tomorrow will make a difference, but I don't know.
I guess nobody really knows, but you're quite right. Yes. We haven't seen this kind of vituperative rhetoric ever before in an American election. In that sense, the world's oldest democracy has certainly touched a new low. Adit, I'm completely out of time, but I'll give you the last word as we wrap up this discussion. Quick response from you. Do you agree with the ambassador who says Kamala Harris actually faces challenges on multiple fronts? There is the Biden legacy that she cannot disassociate herself from, the constant dog whistles from Trump vis-a-vis immigrants, which obviously has deeply polarized the American society, and her gender as well as ethnicity or race. All of these factors actually seem to work against her.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely concur with what Ambassador Goel was basically saying, because that's a difficult legacy for her to manage. Trump's whole mental health saga was another sort of issue. So there have been compelling questions asked of her. Did you actually know about his failing mental health? Because if she does concede to saying that yes, then she would have been, effectively cheating the people of the United States and also the world, so to say. It's a lot of balancing that she has to do, and as a consequence, which is why I'm seeing that sort of a desperate attempt by her. But I have to applaud Professor Bawa, because she made so much of sense right now when she says that the last emotional connect is what is going to be with the fence sitters, because you're ultimately trying to play to their emotions, and which is why it's Kamala Harris is playing all of these sort of tactics, which is the perspective which I didn't see initially, but it makes so much of sense now. So thank you so much, Professor Bawa, for actually outlining that. I'm really grateful to you,
right?
And thank you so much, Neha.
Okay, that's a nice way of concluding this conversation. 1 week to go for the US presidential election. The stakes couldn't be higher, the rhetoric couldn't be shriller, and we can tell you that article after article appearing in the American media seems to suggest the Americans are extremely nervous and anxious at this point in time. It is still anybody's election. On that note, Professor Bawa, Ambassador Goel, Adit Kothari, thank you so much to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. And staying with the news on the US-American election. More Washington Post staffers have stepped down, and more than 200,000 people have cancelled their digital subscriptions after the newspaper's decision not to support Kamala Harris for president. Editorial board members David Hoffman and Molly Roberts both resigned, with forceful letters stating their reasons. Hoffman, who won the Pulitzer Prize just last week, wrote in his resignation letter, and I quote, "I believe we face a very real threat of autocracy in the candidacy of Donald Trump." Roberts said, "I find it untenable and unconscionable that we have lost our voice at this perilous moment." She said she was resigning because the imperative to endorse Kamala Harris over Donald Trump is as morally clear as it gets. Hoffman, Roberts and others have followed in the footsteps of Robert Kagan, an editor-at-large who left the Washington Post last week after its publisher and CEO, William Lewis, declared that the newspaper would not endorse any candidate in the 2024 presidential race. The Washington Post owner, Jeff Bezos, has made his first public comments since igniting uproar over his decision to withhold the newspaper's endorsement in this presidential election. He has defended the move in a rare op-ed published on Monday by the Post. Bezos, the billionaire Amazon founder, wrote, "Presidential endorsements do nothing to tip the scales of an election. No undecided voters in Pennsylvania are going to say, 'I am going with newspaper A's endorsement.' None. What presidential endorsements actually do is to create a perception of bias, a perception of non-independence. Ending them is a principled decision, and it's the right one." Many high-profile Washington Post staffers have publicly expressed their dismay over how the situation was handled and raised questions of the reason for the 11th hour decision. Some critics have accused Jeff Bezos of letting his business interests drive this decision. All right, from the US elections, let's now turn our attention to the conflict in the Middle East. Israel's parliament has passed a controversial law banning the UN relief agency, UNRWA, from operating inside the country, alarming some of Israel's Western allies who fear the move will worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Israeli officials cited the involvement of a handful of UNRWA thousands of staffers in the 7th October attack on southern Israel last year, and a few staffers' membership of Hamas and other armed groups for this decision. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said UNRWA workers involved in terrorist activities against Israel must be held accountable. The head of the agency has in fact said that what Israel has done is a violation of the UN Charter and the international law, and many Israeli allies have expressed deep concern that the already dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza could significantly worsen with this move.
Israel passed a law on Monday banning the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, from operating in the country. Lawmakers cited what they described as the involvement of some UNRWA staffers in the October 7th attack on southern Israel last year, and said staffers had membership in Hamas and other armed groups. The legislation could impact the agency's work in war-torn Gaza, where Israel has been fighting Hamas militants for a year. It could also hit UNRWA institutions in East Jerusalem, which Israel annexed in a move not recognized abroad. But the law does not refer to operations in the Palestinian territories or elsewhere. The legislation has alarmed the United Nations and some of Israel's Western allies, who fear it could further worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Prior to Israel's passage of the legislation, the U.S. State Department on Monday said it was deeply concerned by the proposed ban.
We continue to urge the government of Israel to pause the implementation of this legislation.
UNRWA head Philippe Lazzarini called the vote a, quote, dangerous precedent that opposes the UN Charter and violates Israel's obligation under international law. He added, quote, this is the latest in the ongoing campaign to discredit UNRWA and delegitimize its role towards providing human development assistance and services to Palestine refugees. UNRWA employs tens of thousands of workers and provides education, health services, and aid to millions of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. It has long had tense relations with Israel, but ties have deteriorated sharply since the start of the war in Gaza. The UN said in August that 9 UNRWA staff may have been involved in the October 7th assault and had been fired. A Hamas commander in Lebanon who was killed last month in an Israeli strike was found to have worked for the agency. Another commander killed in Gaza last week doubled as a UN aid worker. UNRWA confirmed both men had been employees.
And Hezbollah, that lost its chief Hassan Nasrallah just last month, has now named his successor. Hezbollah has named Naim Qassem as its new Secretary General following Israel's killing of Hassan Nasrallah last month. The announcement was made by the group today. Hezbollah Senior Council said the decision was made in accordance with its process for selecting leadership. Qassem is committed to Prophet Muhammad's authentic Islam and the core principles of Hezbollah. That's what the statement read.
Israeli strikes on Lebanon's Bekaa Valley overnight killed dozens of people, local authorities said on Tuesday. It's the area's deadliest day yet in more than a year of hostilities, and comes as the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah announced a new leader. Buildings were seen leveled to the ground on Tuesday. The area's governor said there had been nearly 70 deaths, but said the final toll was set to rise as rescue workers dug through the rubble for people buried underneath. No evacuation orders were given for the dozens of towns struck overnight. There was no immediate comment from Israel on the attacks. Large swathes of the Bekaa Valley in the country's east are Hezbollah strongholds. Israel has ramped up its airstrikes across Lebanon over the last month. Plumes of smoke could be seen from the southern city of Marjayoun on Tuesday, as Israeli strikes hit the outskirts of a border village. Its military says it is targeting Iran-backed Hezbollah. Lebanese officials, rights groups, and residents of affected towns say the strikes are indiscriminate. On Tuesday, Hezbollah said its Shura Council had elected Deputy Head Naim Qassem as its new leader. The 71-year-old replaces Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in an Israeli strike late September. Qassem had been deputy chief since 1991 and had long been one of Hezbollah's leading spokesmen, though he is considered by many in Lebanon to lack the charisma and gravitas of Nasrallah. Since Nasrallah's killing, Qassem has said in a televised address that the armed group supports efforts to reach a ceasefire for Lebanon.
That's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
In the heart of New York, an Indian spectacle unfolds. Step into the world of the elite saga, featuring influential Indians who've rocked the globe. From culinary geniuses
This has been nothing less than a dream.
to the wisdom of sages.
And which is why success can never be spelt without you.
Discover the stories behind the stars. Experience the magic behind the scenes. At the first Indian event at the Statue of Liberty. Watch the Elite Saga streaming only on News 9 Plus. Download now.
Joe Biden is not going to be the Democratic presidential nominee.
I made my choice. Kamala Harris. She's experienced. She's tough. She's capable.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds, predators. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
I am the one saving democracy.
He has tapped into the fear and anxiety about demographic change in the US.
This polarization in the United States. Some people are even suggesting that there could be a civil war.
You are this unable to solve your own domestic problems. You have no right to claim to be anybody else in the world. And we're moving into a multipolar world where the United States will not lead.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
This is News 9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News 9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
Representation it's also important, no?
I want to wear this white coat every day and then be a chef.
There are stories. If the name of whiskey is Indri, then there is a whole story behind that.
Cooking food is like a therapy, and eating one is like a pleasure I can give it to myself. With Lounge Nights, I'm on a journey to celebrate and recognize the best food and nightlife establishments in various cities across India.
Radico presents Lounge Nights every Saturday and Sunday only on News 9 Live.
Hello. If your money is fraudulently taken by somebody or if cyber crime takes place with you,
क्या हम कृष्णा दास गुप्ता जी से बात कर रहे हैं?
And you report it to the bank within 3 days of the crime, the bank is liable to pay you 100%. This is clear-cut guidelines.
मैं डिपार्टमेंट से बात कर रहा हूँ.
If you report it within 7 days, the bank is liable to pay you 50%. And if you report it 21 days, I think 25% or something.
और हमने ये देखा है कि आपके आधार कार्ड से एक सिम रजिस्टर्ड हुआ है यहाँ.
If the person gives information within the span of 3 to 4 hours, 100% recovery can be done. I personally have seen a lot of cases where 100% recovery has been done.
आपका सिम यूज हुआ है, इलीगल एक्टिविटीज हुई हैं उस सिम से. Oh my God. Madam, you are also involved in the Naresh Goyal money laundering case.
Hello and welcome to the News 9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News 9 Plus. Here are the top headlines today.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has rolled out a health coverage plan for all Indian citizens aged 70 years and above. Under the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, senior citizens can receive free treatment up to Rs 5 lakhs at empaneled hospitals. Security forces have gunned down 2 terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir's Akhnur sector, taking the total number of militants killed in the 27-hour-long gunfight near the line of control to 3. More than 150 people were injured in a fireworks accident during the Anjambalam Veerakav temple festival in Kerala's Kasaragod. 10 of those injured are critical, the police said. The Mumbai police have arrested a man who allegedly issued death threats to actor Salman Khan and Zishan Siddiqui, son of NCP leader Baba Siddiqui. Siddiqui was shot dead earlier this month, allegedly by members of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. The 20-year-old suspect was arrested from Noida in Uttar Pradesh. Nagpur police say a 35-year-old man from Gondia, Maharashtra is behind the recent spate of hoax bomb threats that triggered panic, causing flight delays and leading to increased security at airports. A special branch official said the suspect, Jagdishu K, had earlier written a book on terrorism. The Enforcement Directorate raided premises linked to IAS officer Vinay Kumar Chaube and several liquor businessmen in Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh in connection with an alleged excise scam. Chaube was the principal secretary to Jharkhand Chief Minister Hemant Soren during the implementation of the 2022 excise policy in the state. In a setback to China's multi-billion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative or BRI, Brazil has decided against joining it. It is the second country after India in the BRICS bloc to not endorse the project. The US has said it will not impose new limits on Ukraine's use of American weapons if North Korea joins Russia's war. The North Korean deployment in Russia's Kursk region is fueling Western concerns that the conflict in Ukraine could widen. Israel's parliament has passed a legislation banning the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency UNRWA from operating within Israel and East Jerusalem, accusing the organization of colluding with Hamas in Gaza. Cooperation with the Israeli military, which controls all crossings into Gaza, is essential for UNRWA to transfer aid into the territory.
Phantom, an Indian Army assault dog, was killed in the ongoing Jammu anti-terror operation yesterday. Now he's the 5th Indian Army canine to die in the line of duty in the last 2 years. Even as Pakistan steps up its proxy war by sending more terrorists into Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian Army has increased its deployments of assault canines. Close to 50% of the Army's dog units are now deployed in J&K. We hear that. There are hero dogs like Axel, Zoom, Kent and now Phantom that have drawn enemy fire, protected our soldiers, taken a bullet for their best friends, man. They're man's best friends in every true sense of the term. But today we are not just talking about these brave dogs, these brave assault dogs who've taken bullets for the people they love. But we're also talking about the men behind them, the dog handlers, and how important they are in the training and the raising of these dog units. And joining me to discuss this with me is my colleague Deepak Badana, who's traveled to Meerut to document the Indian Army's canine force. Deepak, welcome to the News 9 Plus show.
Thank you, sir.
You did this fabulous interview of some of the key people behind our dog squads in Meerut recently. Tell us what you actually learned from that trip to the canine squads where they're trained